Did you know that a single photograph can rewrite history? For centuries, African history was told through the words of colonizers. But what if the pictures they took, the posters they created, and even the postcards they sent home? What if they held a secret truth? This is the story of how we are learning to read African history through a new lens, the power of the visual. We're not just looking at pretty pictures. We're diving into the hidden meanings behind every image, uncovering stories that have been suppressed, distorted, or outright erased. Visual history is now a recognized field of African historical research. Scholars meticulously analyze photographs, not just as pretty pictures, but as evidence shaped by who took them, who saw them, and what they were meant to convey. But it's not as simple as looking at a photo and declaring it truth. A key methodological point is that photography shouldn't be treated as the last word. Instead, it's read alongside oral traditions, travel writing, political movements, and the long shadow of colonialism. The evidentiary problematic is a crucial concept. Images may appear factual, but their meaning always depends on context. Who was the intended audience? How was the image later reused? Was it manipulated for political gain? These are the questions that unlock the real story. Think about colonial photography. Often, these images were created under deeply unequal power relations. They were used for ethnographic classification, to control labor, or to showcase imperial power. They were rarely neutral. Imagine a photograph of a group of African laborers. On the surface, it might seem like a simple depiction of work. But what if the photographer was a colonial administrator, eager to portray Africans as subservient? What if the laborers were forced to pose, their expressions carefully orchestrated to reinforce a racist stereotype? The meaning shifts dramatically. And it's not just photography. African visual culture has long been a tool for political struggle. In the 19th century, Black artists across the Atlantic world used engravings, photographs, and even moving panoramas to fight slavery and challenge racist representations. They laid the groundwork for later Black visual politics, showing how images could be weapons against oppression long before the age of social media. These early forms of visual resistance are often overlooked, but they are crucial to understanding the long history of African agency. These images helped to construct racial and political hierarchies, but they also became tools of resistance. Africans and Black activists used them to contest stereotypes, to claim modernity, to assert their dignity and leadership. Think of early photographs of African intellectuals and political leaders. By presenting themselves in dignified poses, wearing Western clothing, and engaging in intellectual pursuits, they challenged the racist notion that Africans were somehow inferior. They used the very tools of colonialism to undermine it, to showcase their humanity and potential. The rise of visual history has expanded our understanding of African history. It forces us to ask how power works through looking, framing, archiving, and circulation, not just through written documents. How did colonial powers control what the world saw of Africa? How did they curate archives to reinforce their own narratives? And how did Africans resist these efforts and reclaim their own visual stories? This matters beyond the academic world. Visual materials shape what the public remembers about slavery, colonialism, liberation, and nation-building. They influence what we see in museums, textbooks, documentaries, and social media. If we don't critically examine these images, we risk perpetuating harmful stereotypes and overlooking the complexities of the past. But much African photographic history survives not only as studio portraiture or documentary photography but also through postcards and photojournalism. These seemingly innocuous items changed how African people were seen by colonial and global audiences. Postcards, for example, often depicted idealized images of African life, reinforcing stereotypes about exoticism and primitivism. Photojournalism, while sometimes offering glimpses of reality, could also be sensationalized and biased, focusing on conflict and poverty rather than the everyday lives and achievements of African people. The most important historical question is often not what does the photo show, but why was this image made, who controlled it, and how was it circulated? That shift is central to current scholarship on African visual history. You see, contemporary scholarship on African photography deliberately moves beyond the image alone. Scholars connect it with speech, memory, and political practice. This is especially important in societies where oral history remains central. The photograph is just one piece of the puzzle, a starting point for a deeper exploration of cultural meanings and historical contexts. One of the biggest controversies in African visual history is colonial control of the image. Many photographs of Africans were made under unequal power relations, often for ethnographic classification, labor control, or imperial display rather than neutral documentation. This raises serious ethical questions about the use and interpretation of these images. Who owns the story they tell? How do we ensure that they are not used to perpetuate harmful stereotypes? Another unresolved issue is the archive problem. Many African visual records are held outside Africa or were created through colonial institutions. This means that interpretation is often shaped by foreign collecting histories and institutional bias. How can we repatriate these images and ensure that they are interpreted from an African perspective? Visual history also exposes how anti-Black and anti-African stereotypes were manufactured through the circulation of images. Visual archives are central to understanding propaganda and historical erasure. Through careful analysis, we can uncover the ways in which images were used to dehumanize and marginalize African people, justifying colonial rule and perpetuating racist ideologies. Suppressed history in this field often means missing context, names were omitted, subjects were anonymized, and local meanings were stripped away when images entered colonial archives or postcards. Without this context, the images become detached from their original meaning, open to misinterpretation and manipulation. But the good news is that contemporary African creators are using photography, film, digital illustration, and social media as visual activism, continuing older traditions of political image-making in updated forms. They are reclaiming their visual narratives, challenging stereotypes, and asserting their agency. Current archival work and digitization projects are rescuing and reinterpreting visual materials so they can be used in education, public history, and identity formation. These projects are vital for preserving African visual heritage and making it accessible to future generations. New scholarship on African photography links historical image-making to present-day debates about representation, race, memory, and decolonization, showing that visual history remains politically relevant. These debates force us to confront the legacies of colonialism and to consider the power of images to shape our understanding of the world. The popularity of visual storytelling in modern Africa reflects the same historical logic seen in older photo archives. Images are powerful because they can travel across language barriers and reach mass audiences quickly. In a world saturated with images, African artists and activists are using visual media to communicate their stories, challenge dominant narratives, and mobilize social change. Finally, African artists and historians now use visual media to challenge inherited colonial narratives and produce counter-histories that center African agency. They are telling their own stories, in their own voices, reclaiming their visual heritage, and shaping the future of African history. This is not just about looking at old photographs. It's about understanding the power of images to shape our understanding of the world, to challenge injustice, and to inspire change. So, what stories do you see in these images? The answer might surprise you if you dig deep enough.